Welcome to Perspectives on Social Justice, where we continue to give the world a voice. I am Lairalaine White, your host. This month, our show focuses on the status of the church. Tonight, I've gathered church leaders from across the country to discuss these important developments that are unique to their context, and we will get started. This particular dialogue shifted to care for wounded healers,
and what about retirement? As
equal
people
pay.
know, there is a class action lawsuit going on right now in the AME Church over the pension fund, which was once valued at $126 million just last year, that has lost at least $90 million. And so it has dwindled down. And so with respect to where we're going,
Q.Fortson.
I'm sorry. Good. Y'all gotta warn me before you make when you say stuff like
I'm
that.
sorry, Doc. Go ahead.
Wow.
That's okay. That's all right. And I mean, it's a tight subject.
It's out there.
And so with respect to, because we all of us, I think everybody on this panel is past 50. And so we talking about, except Reverend Buckson, Dr. Buckson, you might not be past 50 yet. That's okay.
No, I'm not the one that's under 50. I'm over 50. I'm not the one that's under 50.
You know you over.
Am I the young one? Am I the youngster on this?
You would have to go get everybody's stuff if we were sitting at the table. Absolutely.
Easy. And I don't mind serving you guys. You guys are great.
But I wonder, okay, but if I can use the AME Church, I ain't scared to use the AME Church as an example. They're most of the male pastors. I say most of the male pastors that are pastoring first churches on districts. They are making a certain amount of money, but not all. I'm not looking at the numbers, but I'm willing to bet that because there's not a lot of women that are pastoring first churches on districts that are making the same amount of money that the men are. And so with respect to that, that's going to make a difference when it comes time for retirement. That makes a difference in your pension. It makes a difference in your standard of living. And so where's the church and the church's position and all of that? Dr. Mason, you stated earlier that there's no concern in Christian Methodism about that, which I find hard to believe. But would you talk to us about what your perspective is on that? And welcome back.
Thank you. No, when I said that there was no concern, we are aware of what has transpired with the AME Church and also with the AME Zion Church. And so it has heightened interest and transparency with our fiscal officers and with the College of Bishops. In fact, yesterday on my show, I interviewed the two candidates for General Secretary, Department of Finance and Investments. And of course, that question came up about protocols, measures in place to prevent what happened to the AME Church retirement fund from happening. So I don't want to say that there's no concern, but what we're trying to do is to make sure that the measures that we have in place are working, and that there is accountability and that there is transparency. I don't know all of the particulars for the AME Church, but I just find it so hard to believe that nobody did not see that coming, or if they saw it, that they would not allow it to get to the point where it did. But I also want to talk about equity in salary, and that's a tough question, because in the Methodist Church, most Methodist churches, well, let's say the CME Church, of course, salary is based on the particular church, the church size, the annual income. All of those factors are in place. Most CME pastors are bivocational. Okay. Even at the leading churches, at the number one churches on the district are bivocational. So equity is not just a gender based, equity is across the board for all preachers, all pastors as it relates to that. Certainly, I do agree with you that we do not have, and in Atlanta, we do not have any female pastors pastoring a church in metropolitan Atlanta, the senior pastor of a church at all. And that is, that's something to behold, that we do not have that. But also most of these churches, memberships are dwindling. There should be conversation and discussion on using factual data on possible merger and consolidation, words that most Methodist churches don't want to discuss, particularly the CME church. I don't know about the AME church, but we need to be having those kinds of conversations as it relates to church salary, equity, insurance. There ought to be a universal insurance plan for all CME preachers. We do not have it. We do not have it. I don't know what the AMEs have. So it is not just gender based. It is the concern for equity across the board for all pastors, male and female. But it's so much to unpack with that, Dr. White, that you're right. That's another whole show and another time. But it does raise some flags and some concerns.
And that's amazing about the CME church not having a female senior pastor right here.
Well, remember, we only have one female bishop.
Right.
And she's been bishop for 12 years. Now we have we have 4 candidates, aspirants running. Okay, hold on just a second. Hold on, y'all. I'm gonna have to click off because they're asking me to speak. Hold on. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's okay. That's okay. So does anybody else have anything to offer when we talk about equity and pay?
All I'm gonna say is if you do the work, pay them.
Okay.
If you do the work, pay them. I don't care what gender they are. I was about to say something else. I don't care what gender they are. If they do the work, pay them.
Well, the thing is we're getting paid. We're getting paid, but it's not equal to our counterparts.
But you're saying that without a context, right?
Okay.
The context of most denominations is that, especially, and I'll just, for the AME church, it's not like we have a human resources department. Like when I worked for Atlanta Public Schools, there was a grid. This how many years, this what you get paid. This how many degrees, this what you get paid. We don't function with a human resources department in that way. It is, you are paid based on what you negotiate and what you negotiate as the strength of the church where you are assigned. So we don't have a base salary for pastors, and we are expected to make sure that we are, and it's old school. They say you don't bring it in, you don't get it.
Kill what you eat.
Right. And so that is a very different construct, because there is not a denominational pay scale. And we have not ever had one.
Yeah,
and we have we function in a world that says you work for us because we pay y'all, right? We pay up. You work for us, but we don't give you other benefits. It's like a principal. I'm from education. It's like a principal getting assigned to a school, and the principal sitting down with the assistant principals and deciding how much is the district going to pay me? Right? And that was a thing even, and I know we're talking about church, but it's the same structure. When Atlanta Public Schools went to small schools and there were principals who they went from like 5 high school principals or 6 high school principals to almost 25 right? Because they had all small schools. And those principals at those small schools who had 100 children were expected to get paid the same thing as principals who did not go to small schools, who were at comprehensive schools and were dealing with thousands of children. And so there's this piece right there when we look at that, even from the church perspective, that we can't just say they're not getting there's so many factors related to why there is not equity. Because if you don't get assigned to a
That's
church
a great
that
point.
can pay you,
That's
then
a
you're
great
going to get my first charge. I basically paid my salary because I was bivocational.
Right. But here's the thing, Doc. I agree with you, but at the same time, we know of situations where people have been appointed to churches, and there was the appointments favored our male counterparts.
Oh, they always do. Absolutely.
Right.
But even with the male counterparts, I have male colleagues who are at churches who aren't getting paid too. Right. So there are churches where they're coming out of their own pocket to make sure that they pay their denominational assessments. Right. That I don't know what it is. I don't know what God's favor has shined upon me. I don't know, because I am one of those women who's at a first church in Atlanta. Right. And that hasn't happened. That's not been before. And so it is, and still, it's still the strength of the district it's the strength of the district for what presiding elders get paid. It's the strength of the district for the strength of the church for what pastors get paid. Yeah. And what you negotiate and how you structure. Now, if I go into a church and I leave them worse off, should I still be getting the same salary? Like, how do we do that? And likewise, as we flourish, should I then be negotiating?
Right, but that does happen in African Methodism, right? That if you lead a church worse off, that has happened.
Oh, absolutely, it happens all the time.
Right.
But that's because we do not have a common structure.
Right.
It is very church based.
So when you say context, I know you're referring to this is what happens in African Methodist, in the African Methodist Episcopal context, as well as probably in the Christian Methodism as well, and even in those churches, Reverend Shelton, where you say each church is individual, or you're muted.
Independent.
Autonomous. They're autonomous, right? Autonomous. And so it's very subjective when it comes to that. But see, I would also argue, right, that a lot of our churches, even across the traditional mainline African American churches, that there is a level of disequity, if you will, when it comes to paying women versus paying males.
But it's very deceptive. That because when I went to my first charge, I made the same thing as every man and every pastor that had been there before me.
Mm-hmm.
For years.
Right.
Right. No, I'm very clear because I've read the records. You go back and you read. That's my responsibility. I'm supposed to know what's been happening, right? You're not gonna walk in the door and you've been paying them $100 and you're gonna pay me $5. Like that ain't gonna work, right?
That's not gonna work, right?
Right. So we go back, and so I go back and look. So it is so church based. But I'm gonna go back to what Dr. Mason said a few minutes ago, right? We also do not want to have the hard conversations with churches who may not be able to sustain a salary or other kinds of benefits for a pastor. Mm-hmm. So if you cannot, so what do we do as denominations when we are seeing churches in decline and there are 4 or 5 in the same space? What do we do how do we help pastors to understand that the power is in the real estate, and what could we do differently with the real estate to help birth other streams of income that would take some of that burden off of the declining membership, but still have a great social impact? So there's so many facets associated with what that looks like, because, I hear you. How you gonna sign somebody and this is somebody who you require to get a Master's of Divinity, and they only gonna get paid $25.
That's right. That's right.
Like I get that, but that happens to men and women.
Mm-hmm.
It happens to men and women.
It does. It does. So I can't disagree with you on that, because I know firsthand. I've been through that myself, but I also know that there is a difference in that we, more often than not, there is a difference in what women get versus what men get. I mean, and not just in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but across. I mean, I'm speaking church universally. There's just no equity. There's not a whole lot of equity. But I do understand what you mean when you talk about it's very contextual, and in ministry in the AME church, and not just AME church, but when it comes to the pastoral ministry, it's very subjective. So it's all about how do people feel about you, and if they like you, that type of thing. All of that plays a role in it, and so it gets tricky, as you say. It's very tricky in the church context when you talk about that. You're right. You're absolutely right. And on that note, I'm going to end this discussion. We will. It's always great to have my colleagues. I've got some outstanding colleagues here that have participated in this conversation. But on that, and we're going to go ahead and close this out. And with that, I want to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King when he says that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Because I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And this is the interrelated structure of reality. And on that note, I will bid everyone good night.
Good night, you guys.